Yeah, we knock on the door, I yell, nothing. Open up the door, there's somebody passed out naked. My lesson here is be careful when you're booking showings at properties in a university town on a Sunday morning,
right,
when school's in.
Welcome to another episode of Here We Grow. Today, I am super excited to have my good buddy, Paul Carney, on. Welcome, buddy.
How you doing?
I'm awesome. So, Paulie is a new father and avid musician, which I think you don't play enough of. And I was just about to say it before, but I thought it was going to be really funny if we just had, like, Frankie sitting here, like, on the thing, and I pretended like I was going to start introducing, or, like, talking and interviewing your newborn son, or have you here with your guitar. So maybe next time we'll have to have... Maybe you can play the Here We Grow intro that Trev made.
We'll time it for like right after one of his feeds, so he'll be likely a pretty decent guest on the show.
Nice. So, okay. So Paulie's been in, how long have you been in the business for so far?
Oh, pretty close to around the same amount of time as you. What's that?
Right.
7 years, I think.
Yeah, I think we met in our courses.
That's right.
Honest,
We did.
yeah.
We were doing the commercial course.
So, okay. So talk about getting into real estate and kind of your first couple of years, because I know that when you came to EXP, you originally were with another team, and obviously we're looking for another, option. When you came over here, I know you kind of considered our team. It's very different than the team that you came from, which I think is a more traditional. That team was a more traditional kind of layout. What made you so talk about getting into real estate, and then that original team experience, and what made you decide to go kind of on your own independent journey?
Yeah, well, I guess from the very beginning, real estate wasn't something I ever considered until somebody actually suggested it to me. And that person was actually a lady. She's still in the business now. She's been at it forever. She sold my parents their house 35 years ago, or no, we're actually getting later than that. 37 years ago, I think it was. And when I was working for a photocopier company, there was Mary Campo in my district, so I would stop in and say hello to her, and she basically just suggested, I think you'd be really good at real estate and you should consider that. And after that conversation, I really thought about it for a few weeks, and sure enough, I was making decisions to get into my coursework, and she actually was really good at helping me out and gave me a few hours around the office. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of it. As soon as I got licensed, I was working at Royal LePage, and I really owe a large part of that to Mary Campo.
Yeah, and she's a legend.
Yeah, she's a legend
Shout
in this town.
Mary
She's won Businesswoman of the Year a few times in town, and she's such a giving person, and she does a lot of that behind the scenes. Yeah. So big shout out to her.
So then from there, you went over to this other, notable team, large team at the same brokerage, and talk about that experience of your sort of like a buyer's agent, right? Or how did that structure work?
Basically a buyer's agent. So there was a few superstars at my office at Royal LePage, and I had the opportunity to work for one of them. And Adam Coven, and awesome real estate agent. And I knew that I had a lot to learn about the business, especially with the type of real estate that he's selling. Mm-hmm. So it was a great learning opportunity for me there.
High-end luxury.
High-end luxury.
He was doing.
He's also doing really interesting commercial buildings as well too. Mm-hmm. That places I've never even walked in before, and it was a really cool experience. So I was with him for 2 years, and we were one of the top teams at Royal LePage, and his team is still thriving today. Yeah.
So, okay. So then making your transition over to come to EXP, we kind of talked about it a little bit before, but looking at, because obviously I'm assuming our team was sort of an option. What made you make that decision to go out on your own and have your own branding and do your own thing?
I think it was really just a sense of identity. Mm-hmm. I was at a point in the business where I had a few good years under my belt. I had learned a lot of good things, and I was starting to get a little bit more confident in the work I was doing. So naturally, I was looking to get a little bit more exposure. Mm-hmm. And the team that I was on, there just wasn't as much exposure that I had to the marketplace, because I was working underneath a team lead, and I always wanted to do what he was doing. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of a focus for me to try to go out on my own for a little bit. And I knew that if I wasn't able to do it, then I was sure I could probably get back into a team structure and be okay. But yeah, it was a scary call at the time. I was happy with where I was at, mm-hmm. but I knew that I was also at a point where I just needed to challenge myself and get to the next frontier.
It's kind of crazy. You actually took that leap of faith. You were like one of the first guys to come over that wasn't already with our independent brokerage. And there was a big leap of faith, I think, coming over to EXP. We didn't really know. It was very new in Canada, and you went all in, which was cool. And now, years later, it's paid off.
It was just like really fortuitous timing. So as soon as I was getting off of a team, I just happened to do a deal with your dad, Pierre, at the time. And I just asked the question because I knew you guys had closed down your independent brokerage. You had this really awesome year. And then I got to learn more about why you guys ultimately made that decision to switch over. And then I realized I was already in a point of transition with what I was doing. And I just thought, well, I'm already shaking it up a little bit. Let's shake it up a bit more. And so I went for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the big reason that I ended up having Paul on today is yesterday I had an interesting story happen to me. And I was telling Paulie about it, and he basically immediately responded with a one-up version of the story. So I actually have...
No, that's not true. Yours was pretty good.
I don't know. So I have two stories. There's actually another one that happened to me that is very similar. So I'll tell that one first, and then I'll tell what happened yesterday, and then you can tell yours. And I feel like it's not the first. It's the first time that it's. Well, I guess it's not the first time it's happened to me yesterday because it's happened to me twice, and it definitely will not be the last. So I'm not really looking forward to the next few times I imagine it'll happen in my career. But so the first incident was a sort of full circle moment for me because in high school, in my younger days, I definitely enjoyed to have fun. And with stricter parents, they didn't always approve of the fun that I was having. So
sure.
I found my way into some trouble, and here and there, as any kid does. But so I am showing a Sunday morning. I am showing a property to some out of town buyers of mine, and it's literally like right around the corner from my high school. And so in talking to the agent, I said, listen, I'm doing a tour. I don't know how my timing's going to be. I might be off by like 30 minutes. So you never know, right?
Right.
I might be on or off by 30 minutes. Hope that's all right. And she says, yeah, no problem. Like the sellers are out of town, so no one's going to be there. So take your time, whatever. So I'm like, all right, cool. So we get there, and sure enough, I am like 30 minutes late. But we get it because we had seen another couple of properties. We get in. I do the classic knock on the door, open the door. Hello, hello. I scream it. And especially now since this event, I scream it even more. So when I walk in, I'm like, the lights, like not all the lights are on, but like a few lights are on, which is usually like it's one or the other, right? Either all the lights are off or the seller's been there before and they've turned all the lights on. But I'm thinking, well, the sellers are gone. So why is there a few lights on? And then the cat comes out of the back corner and like starts walking towards me. I'm not thinking anything of it, but I'm like, something's weird here. So like, I'm like, hello, anybody home? Hello. And like, I'm yelling at the top of my lungs. I ring the doorbell a few times. Nobody. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's go.
Your spidey sense kicked in.
Yeah. So I'm taking my shoes off and I walk in and I come around the corner in the kitchen, and on the couch is this like obviously high school kid whose parents were gone, passed out on the couch. And I'm like, I was like, yo, dude, hey, yo, and like nothing. And I'm looking at Brent, like turning
teenagers,
down the mic,
they like to sleep.
Like, so I was like, obviously this kid's hungover on a Sunday morning and made his way home while his parents were away and passed out on the couch. So I'm like, but man, my guys were from out of town. I only have them today, and I need to show them this house. So I go back to the doorbell, and I'm just like, ding, 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 ding. Go back in. I'm literally yelling at the kid. I'm like from like me to the wall away. And nothing. Like he was out cold. So I go to my buyer. I'm like, man, like I bet we could go through this whole house and not wake this kid up. I could probably sit down on the couch next to him. But I don't think it's okay. I think we're going to have to try to come back or do a virtual showing or something else. So that was the first time that had happened to me. Yesterday, here's a classic story in real estate. I go to, and this is a story I'm telling Paul yesterday. So I go to book a showing. I had a showing booked from last weekend, or it's like Friday. So over the weekend, I knew my buyers were away, and I was meeting them at 10 a.m. on Monday. So I get there a little bit early. I'm sitting there. There's no cars in the driveway. I'm waiting. It's 10:05, and again, spidey senses. I'm like, should I have checked in? I know that my buyers were at their trailer over the weekend. Did they forget? Sitting there, another couple minutes goes by. Anyways, I've now sat there for 25 minutes. 10:15.
Lordy.
I'm like, they're not coming. So I'm like, I have an idea though. I'm like, why don't I send a video to the buyer of a tour of the house. Like, it's obviously vacant. I can go in, take my video, whatever, and my buyers can approve or disapprove. At least it saves me the ride coming back. So then I go fumbling with the lockbox. It's not opening. I almost call the agent. I finally get it open. And I'm like obviously I'm moving that lockbox around a lot. It's banging on the door. I bang on the door once I get it open. I open the thing. Hey, hello, hello, hello. And I start taking a video. And as I'm spanning with my video, there's somebody sleeping in the bedroom with the door open. I'm like, oh, not again. So I just kind of like my heart actually sank because I was screaming so loud. Like, the last thing I want is this person to like turn around and like just have like any kind of conversation. So who was sleeping?
Was it also a hungover teenager, or was
I looked like an adult. I think I don't know,
okay.
But I'm like, I awkwardly back out and shut the door. I'm like, I didn't even get to do the one thing that I wanted to do after and the showing was like 30 minutes away too. So I'm like, an hour of driving, 30 minutes of sitting there waiting, and I didn't even get to get a video for my buyer. So then Paulie starts laughing and he's like, well, I have a little bit of a one-up story on you. Being in a university town, I feel like this is going to happen. Similar crazy stories are going to happen to us, unfortunately. But
yeah.
So what happened to you?
Well, that was pretty good. I don't know if it's a one-up, but Queen's University showing. So it's one of the big schools in town, and the properties near it. Well, on a Sunday morning when you're booking those showings,
I'm treading lightly from now on. Yeah, on a Sunday mornings.
My lesson here is be careful when you're booking showings at properties in a university town on a Sunday morning, right, when school's in. So
that's an important advice for new realtors.
Right? There's also a lesson with the story here. Yeah. But so we show up at this house. I have some investors from out of town, and the place is around $1 million, and it's got several bedrooms in it. Really nice, 1 block away from Queens. So there was proper notice on the door. In this case, when it's tenant occupied, you got to have your 24 hours notice. So there was a sign posted on the door, which I was glad to see that, okay, well, even though there's some beer cups sitting around here, at least I think they know we're coming. Knock on the door, no one answers. I could hear somebody ruffling around in one of the rooms. But I go in, and on the first bedroom up the stairs, where we didn't think anybody else was there because nobody responded to us, we knock on the door, I yell, nothing. Open up the door, there's somebody passed out naked. And, close the door, and you just hear them go, oh, hello. I'm like, hey, we had a showing scheduled today. Did you get the notice? Like, oh, yeah, sure. Come on in. Like, have a look. I'm like, oh, we'll just be downstairs. Let us know when you're ready to go. So now when I go through even like a vacant house when no one's there, I'm still yelling, hello. Just thinking about that one time, knowing that, geez, you never know what you're going to walk into sometimes.
I'm literally traumatized.
Yeah.
And in the amount of times that I've opened a door, and especially like if you see a closed door, I'm nervous. Like, unless it's like a family home in like an average neighborhood, which even still, when you see a closed door, you're like, there's somebody in here. And what lies beyond this door, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, so I wanted to ask you this question. This is one of my favorite questions to ask on the podcast, because I think every single realtor has a different answer. What do you think makes a good realtor?
I think what makes a good realtor is, I don't want to be too generic with this answer, but I really do believe it, is being a problem solver.
Right.
I think what we ultimately do is have to solve a whole series of problems that are really unique to every property and every client that we're selling. There's so many moving variables happening at the same time. The laws are always changing. The market dynamics are always changing. Consumer patterns are always changing. And so it's so important to be able to solve these emerging problems for clients as we, continue to go further into the market that we're having, right? Especially now, it's important to really be a problem solver while we see a bit of a market shift.
Right. And it's funny because I feel like that's actually the first time I think I've heard that answer, but it's very true. I think a lot of realtors, when I ask them this question, it's like, well, they think of marketing or negotiating or kind of like the generic, like you said, it was a generic answer. I actually think it may not be as generic or like mainstream of an answer, because most people think of like marketing and, how are they going to sell the property? Not necessarily. It's one thing to get an offer and market the property and get something inbound. That's when the fun starts. Right. That's when like you have to put on many hats, be sometimes a marriage counselor. You have to be, scheduling general contractors. And I think as you get your years in the business, I mean, there's only one way to learn, and that's from making mistakes, unfortunately. But you
Best
have
way to
have,
learn, though,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. And unfortunately, like in your first few years, sometimes it's at the client's expense until you learn. But I think that is a huge value to every single client is dealing with somebody who's a seasoned veteran at solving problems when it's close to the closing table. Now we're getting into the situation too. This is a huge thing that's going to be so important moving into this market is when inspections happen. There's going to be issues because now we have inspections back.
Right.
So when there's issues found on the buying side and the selling side, how do we manage that moving forward? And how is that going to be negotiated? Because I know I have my own tactics. Like I think that, and I strongly believe in this in every single situation, like a lot of times you find issues in an inspection, the buyers will say, well, I want the sellers to fix this or I don't want to close on it.
Right.
Conversely, I think the opposite. I think the seller should look for a price reduction before they fix anything, because the thing is, if the seller is literally selling the home and moving out of the home, there's no benefit to the renovations or fixes that they're going to make.
Right.
Why would they spend any more than the absolute bare minimum on those renovations? So I think it's up to the buyer to find out what the price of those renovations need to be. How actually serious are they? Because you have to.
I think that's the big thing is how serious it is, right?
Yeah.
If it's something like a legitimate safety hazard, or if it's something where it could affect the value of the home between now and the end of close, and what I mean is a hole in the roof, then that's got to get fixed ASAP for that deal to move forward, by a professional company, and we need to see paperwork on that. I think though, like it depends on how reasonable the request is, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes you'll see buyers throwing so many things at the moon, basically, of what we want done, and then there's a negotiation with.
I got that. I got one of those
identifying what's maybe reasonable here and what's not.
I got one of those emails yesterday. I was like, man, the list. I was like, come on. I actually had one time, my very first year, I had a buyer send me a list of 23 items, all the way down to the cover plates on the outlets needed to be changed. And I was like, so obviously at this point, we weren't at EXP. We were just independent.
The cover
brokerage.
plates?
Yeah, like they were, like cracked. Like, you know what I mean? Like just what covers it.
Wow.
Like those are like, I don't like not.
I would prioritize that fix because we can do that for $20. We can make this happen,
right? So yeah. And I had somebody tell me one time that in the inspection process, you're basically as a buyer's agent a fire extinguisher. Like you're trying to fight fires the entire time and keep the buyer's expectations reasonable, unless you're buying a brand new home. If you're buying a brand new home, set the bar high. Everything should be done, right? That's why you're spending the extra money on a brand new
100%.
home. Otherwise, you got to expect issues. You don't buy a 10-year-old car and expect it to run like a top. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So you have to set those expectations. But like you said, if there are serious issues, they need to be solved. If there's a hole in the roof or, serious mold or cracked foundation or something, very serious that they didn't know about, let's address it. But and maybe you can talk about your approach to this, because I think my approach is always I try to push for a price reduction. Let the buyers handle it. Get a proper quote from a professional and leave it on the buyers, because then the buyers get to make the decision of it's not just fixed on closing. It's fixed into their degree. So if they want to go a little bit further, because a lot of contractors will say, well, you could do this, or you could go a little step further. And I know, like when I've seen foundation work, there's like, here's the bottom line. The top line is like way up here.
The price reduction is the absolute way to go, because you don't have any control over the people who are going to do the work. What happens if they didn't do it at the quality standard that the buyer had? What happens if something happened to the company and now, there's money tied up there and they've closed down or something like that, or they've delayed the job, which is now going to delay the closing. It's just easier just saying, here's a quote for it, which is very like honest and open as well for the buyer to have. And here's a price reduction to reflect that, and then you can do that. So you're introducing less moving parts to the transaction.
Yeah, I think
that's an important thing.
And back to like what makes a good realtor, I think that's why it's really important to be. Brent used this word on his podcast, or maybe I did, I forget, but it was resourceful. You have to be able to have those contacts for every single one of those things, so that when the time comes, and good relationships with them too, because the other problem is timing is everything. Days on market is everything. The sellers are concerned, when you're in a conditional period, it's still on the market. Nobody's, most people aren't going to see it when it's conditional, but when you have your inspection period over the course of 5 to 10 business days, the sellers are actively waiting to see if this deal falls apart. We got to go back to the drawing board and try to sell this thing. So how quickly quickly can you get those contractors there? And that depends on your relationship with them, right? So if you're sending them referrals, and looking after them, hopefully they look after you.
But
and
at the same time,
reputable.
like if they're reputable,
yeah,
during these times with the trade shortage, they're going to be extremely busy. And if they can't get to a job in 6 months and you need to close in 2 months.
I just mean for the quotes though, getting them in to get an actual, like you said, a reputable quote, and so that it's coming from a decent business instead of just somebody you never heard of. Where
I've even seen it where the sellers have been like proactive, where we've actually looked at the house and they've already got the quote previously done, so it's already something we can.
How do you feel
they're disclosing and we're negotiating right off the bat?
We don't do this in our market a lot, but they do it in other markets. How do you feel about the pre-home inspection? I haven't done it a lot because I find that sometimes it's more liability for the sellers. I think that's why, for whatever reason, Kingston doesn't do it as much. But I know these Toronto agents in Waterloo, our buddy Brandon Town there, they do it on every single listing they have.
Yeah, I definitely have a conversation about it with my sellers, right? Because there are pros and cons about doing that.
Right.
But I think that especially for people that might not have, if, for example, it's an elderly person who hasn't even been in their basement in 10 years, situations like that where it might make sense to get a pre-inspection done so that there's at least transparency being provided to the buyer, but the seller would otherwise not be able to, reveal anything further about some of those details, right? So I guess it's if somebody doesn't have a strong background in understanding real estate, it's nice to be able to take a look at a pre-inspection before you're about to make a decision on buying the home or not. But pre-inspections aren't the be-all end-all because that inspector's still working for the home seller, which is fine, but that's the nature of the relationship. So you as a buyer can still do whatever you need to do to verify that pre-inspection.
Right.
I've seen some pre-inspections where they've been very lacking and very, missing a lot of key information. Yeah. But, the buyer will say, well, I had a pre-inspection, I reviewed it. Yeah, but like a real inspection report, it's very comprehensive and a lot more thorough. So it depends. Some pre-inspections were great. It was a full pre-inspection done.
And it can go great because it rules out that condition. But at the same time, like it is, I just feel like it's a lot of liability on the seller and the inspector too, really. But like you said, I always have that conversation. But so the one thing I wanted to touch on, we only got a few minutes here, but you have a story about the first deal that you ever closed, right? So you told me this a while ago, and actually we're talking about, what stories we should talk about on the podcast, and you mentioned this, and I actually kind of forget what happened. So I think you've definitely told me it before, though.
I'll try to keep this brief because there's a lot going on with this one.
Getting into real estate can be scary, first of all.
Yeah.
Like your first deal, like you're calling your broker about everything, right? Like
that's right.
The schooling process prepares you to a certain extent. My dad always says like the schooling process in Ontario for realtors is like the how to not get sued 101.
Right.
That's all you get.
That's basically it, right? Stay out of real estate jail.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, the first deal I ever did. So I'm working with a client I met at an open house. So when you're starting out, you do a lot of open houses, and actually, they're still great. Like they're awesome to do. Yeah. But they're great at the beginning because you don't have to spend any money to be able to do one and have a chance to meet some leads. Yeah. So sure enough, I meet an out-of-town buyer, and I've been working with her. And as the month drew on of me working with this buyer, there were some warning signs. There was a warning that was put out to a few realtors, hey, that this lady's actually using a few different people at the same time. Like she's in conversation with, 5 different agents. And so, I was trying to get her to work exclusively with me and win her over and at least put my hat in the ring. But I wasn't able to really do that, but I was still able to show her properties. And as the month drew on, she was starting to get really rude, like some conversations over the phone that I can't repeat really on air. Like she just would be swearing at you and hang up the phone on you. And I had thoughts about like, Jesus, like this, what is going on here? Yeah. And then I find out the person actually held down a very well-to-do position. And I'm like, okay, well, everything must be good to proceed and they can close a transaction. So it gets to the point now where they find the house they want to buy. She has to leave on business within 48 hours. And we put an offer in, and she wants to get this deal fully done before she leaves on business. And when I say fully done, I'm talking offer to close.
Oh, wow.
She already had her lawyer's office and everything teed up and cash buyer, right?
Yeah.
So we find a new home. Basically ready to go. where they could theoretically do it.
Right.
And we put in an offer. There was a sign back on the offer, I think, and we eventually get a deal done. And that was the craziest deal because...
so you got it done?
We got it done, but there was one part of it where the client actually tried to, when we were supposed to accept, tried to change a few things on the document. And at the lawyer's office where she was signing, there was like, no, you got to sign it just as is. So that almost tanked the whole deal. It was crazy that they...
And was it a builder's deal?
Tried to do that. Yeah, it was a builder's deal.
You can't change that, yeah.
No, you can't. It was like, they're like, we've already agreed to this, sign this, right?
Yeah.
But they're still trying to do other things. And the lawyer basically was really beside himself, as was I with this client. And when I, tried to fin track them, which we just take their identity and their occupation and everything, they were accusing me of like, oh, you're trying to steal my identity. So that's when, of course, I had to bring in my broker of record to say, hey, I know this is my first deal, but this thing's getting a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
So they were able to fin track my client so that they felt secure with that. But the crazy part about this story was I thought everything was done. Like, we got the deal done. I'm a little bit traumatized, but it's done. I broke the ice. I got my first ever deal. I get a call from the seller's lawyer who says, I don't want this lady on my property. You can come by and pick up the keys.
Wow.
And drop them off. Like, I'm done with her. I'm like, what the heck?
Wow.
And the listing agent said, hey, I had never seen him, this lawyer ever say this in the 20 years I've worked with him.
Jeez.
So now I got the keys and I'm driving over to the house to hand them over. And I just get this pit in my stomach feeling thinking, oh man, what could this client just accuse me of something, just handing the keys over? I need to have my own witness.
Right.
Like, I need to have just anybody in the car that can verify that all I'm trying to do is hand the keys over.
Yeah.
And so sure enough, my mentor, Mary, ended up meeting me because she had heard some of these conversations at the office.
Wow.
So she already knew the background of me dealing with this client. And when I went to get out of the car to hand the keys over, she ripped the keys from my hand and said, I've been wanting to talk to this lady for a couple weeks.
Sick Mary on them.
Yeah. And I'm like, it was just like, and I'm just like sitting in the car like this, tail between my legs. And Mary's got her big fur coat on, walking towards this my client. And basically just said, here's the keys. This ends now.
Yeah.
And,
see you
we're
later.
done
See
here.
you never. Yeah. It's crazy, like the amount of abuse that you take in your first year or two, because you almost kind of have to. Like, every deal means so much more.
You do, but Mary also, you're right about that, and you want to break the ice. But I was also warned a month before any of that happened. Like, she's sitting there saying, "Don't take that on any further. You don't need to put up with that." I'm like, but I want to succeed. I want to do it. Now, if I ever have an interaction with a client like that, I'm running for the hills. I'm not working with them.
You have the luxury of doing that now, though, right? Like, that's what you build your business for. And So I set two records. That was I guess the one record for sure was fastest offer to close. Never heard of that in 48 hours.
Yeah, I still don't know how it even happened.
And what was the other one?
Maybe the craziest deal our office had ever seen.
Dude, I think like it would be a great TV show, like an extension of the podcast, to have somehow a camera follow us around and show the stories or the stuff that we hear and clients, how they treat us and talk to us sometimes and what we have to deal with. Because like you said, there's conversations we shouldn't share, but I think people would be shocked to hear the stuff that we've, had to see and put up with. But
sure. Yeah.
It's a hell of a business. And you're a hell of a guy, dude. So thanks for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
As we wrap up every single podcast,
here we grow.